Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we will be discussing some big RosterMania news, including another roster change involving the OpTic Texas roster. We also have some roster changes from Florida, from Vegas, from Boston as well, to try to replace Methods, who recently retired. Just a lot of stuff happening around the league as we gear up for this third set of qualifying matches for Major 3. A very exciting time in the CDL, maybe, depending on if we get any news regarding Twitch/YouTube over the next week or so, that could make it a little less exciting for some people. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Had a weekend of no matches. Felt pretty good, but had the Super Bowl to fill in, so that was exciting. And ready to hop right in.
Sounds good. Let's start at probably the most important thing to most of our listeners and most of the followers of competitive Call of Duty, OpTic Texas. I can't even speak right. They make another roster change this season. We've talked extensively about some of the past roster changes that have happened, including Dashy temporarily being benched, and then Scump retiring, Dashy coming back into the lineup, and Hook coming into the roster from LAG. Now we have iLLeY hitting the bench. If you remember, in the offseason, iLLeY and Dashy both were benched for approximately 24 hours before being brought back into the lineup, and everything supposedly being smoothed over. And it honestly, with Scump retiring and Hoot coming in and Dashy also coming back into the lineup, I think they overperformed with expectations of like the normal sane fans, the people that saw that there was a lot of stuff happening in this organization or in this roster specifically, and they got fourth place at the most recent major in Boston, where you also attended. And I think we both came to the conclusion that that was a very good result for a team that has experienced a lot in the last month and a half. But OpTic has decided to make another change. They have benched iLLeY and have signed Dan Ghosty, a Challengers player who is, I think, rather unknown by a lot of COD fans. Like, we have, if you're a really diehard Challengers fan, then you probably know him, or I guess he plays in the collegiate COD league, so maybe that's where you would know him from. But really, the most diehard fans would be the only ones to know him. But he's getting the opportunity of a lifetime just to immediately come into OpTic Texas's roster, and try to help them, I guess, get to championships is really the only expectation they have. So let's get your thoughts on this. Ghosty coming in to replace iLLeY. Did you know who Ghosty was before this roster change? And what is your reaction to OpTic going for a Challengers player instead of another CDL pro or just a former CDL pro?
No, I mean I didn't know much about Ghosty, other than obviously at the Boston Major hearing about how well he performed and eventually winning that Challengers event. So really that was the first time I had heard about him. I definitely don't keep up with Challengers or amateur as much as I once did back in the MLG days, where we actually had those amateur teams consistently competing through Open to get into pool play. So yeah, I don't know much about him. Like I said, other than the fact that he was apparently absolutely flying at the Boston Challengers event, so he has apparently put up the numbers to justify getting signed. And I think there were some rumblings that he was potentially going to Florida before this, and then it was eventually going to OpTic, which is a dream move for most players and many senses of the word. So I think it puts a little more pressure on him going to OpTic versus Florida.
Yeah, definitely.
You think of amateurs getting a shot on some of the less popular teams, or the teams that are a bit lower in the standings. But as we've talked about many times on this podcast, it's basically championship or bust for the Green Wall.
Yep.
At least in the eyes of the fans. So a lot of pressure on him to perform immediately. Based on the numbers we saw in challengers, it's possible he meets those expectations, but we're just gonna have to see what he's capable of doing at the pro level, because this will be the actual first taste of um, the CDL, and CDL is inevitably different than um, challengers, at least um, in terms of the level of play. But at the same time, you got former pros and aspiring pros down there, so it's just that next step of progression, and he's taken it, maybe um, on a team that some people wouldn't have expected, but it's definitely a power move by OpTic, trying to go after another young talent here, and we'll just have to see how he does.
Yeah, it's definitely, like you said, a huge step up in competition. There are very talented players and challengers, no doubt about that, and especially with how well he and his team performed in the Challengers Open in Boston and in some of the online events as well this season. It's obvious that he's very talented, but it's very surprising to see him not get a CDL opportunity, because that's exactly what you would expect. When you fry in challengers and you win in challengers, you expect for those players to come up to the CDL level. But since we've had the CDL and since we've had challengers, we've seen a lot of these players end up on somewhere like Florida or Paris, or it's name a team that is floating like in the middle or below the middle of the pack. But OpTic is a team that technically, I guess they are in the middle of the pack currently in the standings, but the expectation is nowhere near the middle of the pack. And if they get second at champs, that would be considered a disappointment for a lot of these very hardcore OpTic fans. And that's not fair, but that's the reality of it. But Ghosty, I guess, like, if you're looking at what he's been able to do in challengers, I believe he's only 20 years old, maybe 21 if I'm not mistaken. But he just won the Boston Open. He played with fellow Two Real Ulysses, and Nagafen was their coach. So they won the Boston Open. They won the most recent North America Challengers Cup. They got second in the Elite Stage 1 playoffs. It's obvious that they are very talented in general. He played with Gunless, Pentagram, and Pristini in the first Challengers Open of the season in Raleigh, and they got top 12. So, I mean, top 12 in first place, pretty good placings. It's just a very big burden for him, I'm sure, to come in and, he's not replacing Scump, but in a way he kind of is, because this is the whole idea, right? That they need a new star player, OpTic does. Like, they've had Scump for so long, they had Nadeshot before him, and it's just like the OpTic needs like kind of a new era, essentially, now that Scump has officially retired. And maybe Ghosty will be that. I mean, Shotzi's already a star player, but like, he was also on the team with Scump. He doesn't seem like to have like this, I don't know, this gigantic personality, but Shotzi's probably one of the most talented players in the league. Getting back to my point, I think this is a really big step up for Ghosty, and I'm very excited for him, because I love that the Challengers players are getting the opportunity. I'd love to see even more Challengers players, specifically like someone like Mohawk, back-to-back Challengers champion. I think like all of these people, they really do need opportunities, and Ghosty, if he makes the most of his opportunity, it's like the biggest thing that he could ever do in his career, right? To come in and help OpTic get back to winning championships. That's a huge thing. But it's going to be very difficult, because this team still needs time to gel, and this league is very talented. And you have a team like Atlanta FaZe right at the very top. They're going to be hard to beat no matter who you put against them. And you can't count out New York or LAT. A lot of these teams in the league are just very talented. So it's going to be very tough for OpTic and Ghosty as their new addition to overcome those teams.
Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind too, as we talk about like expectations for Ghosty and whatnot, is that we've mentioned it multiple times talking about different rosters over the years, is that there are only so many kills on the map. You can put literally the 4 best Slayers in the world on the same team. We'll just, like Celium, Shotzi, Dashy, and I don't know who was number 4 last year, but whatever the case may be, you could put literally the top 4 KDs on the team last year, and inevitably somebody is not uh, going to have the highest KD because there's only so many number of kills on the map that you can actually get. So I think that kind of works in Ghosty's favor. Now it could work against him in the sense of if he enters this OpTic lineup and he isn't like dropping the high numbers that we saw at the Boston's Challenger, maybe that frustrates him, and he starts like ego challing or going for um highlight reel plays, however you want to word it. But obviously, without knowing him or his play style, it's unfair to say that if that's a possibility. But it is a possibility in the sense that it could be something that happens, just as likely as he enters this lineup and he isn't dropping that same number of kills, but he doesn't have to because, like we said, only so many kills on the map. If he's doing his job that the team needs him to do, that could lead to OpTic success. So I think that's something we're gonna have to, just see how the team performs as a unit. Because even a guy like Hook, he came into the league as Hook the Nuke, and he'll have his games where he can be that role player, right? He doesn't have to drop the 40 bombs, like we maybe saw when he first entered Pro COD, and so that's something we could see out of Ghosty here. I mean, and this could all not matter at all. He could, instantly enter the lineup and drop 40 bombs consistently and just be the leading Slayer on the team. But I think it's just worth mentioning that, we'll have to see how the team performs as a unit and how that, Ghosty's playstyle works with Dashy, especially if he's on that AR. With Dashy, how they work together, how the pacing of Shotzi and Hook affects his ability to get kills or get trades, however it may be. So yeah, it's without actually knowing much about Ghosty or his playstyle, it's kind of tough to sit here and talk about that. But it is worth mentioning, at least in my eyes, that we'll have to see how he does and go from there.
Yeah, so I pulled up, so if you go to breakingpoint.gg, Easy Mac, who works for Atlanta FaZe, I believe is an analyst, he compiles some of the challengers stats, specifically the stage 1 elite group stage stats. So this is only 5 matches, and this is the only one that I could find, in this shorter time frame. But to give you an illustration of in these 5 matches, which are online, so take them with a grain of salt. Ghosty, he was on that team with 2 Real Fellow and Ulysses. He dropped a 1.32 KD across the game modes, which included a 1.38 hardpoint KD, a 0.96 S&D KD, and a 1.34 control KD. And I feel like we should say it because it's just always needed to be said that stats aren't everything, and we know that. But I just thought it was interesting that, I mean, obviously if you're just looking at the stats, he has the highest KD of any of these players in the NA Challengers Elite players, which is very impressive. But to your point, there are only so many kills to be had. And OpTic has had the issue before, which I think is an issue, maybe they don't, but that they sometimes focus too much on slaying. And I'm not saying this current roster, but historically, OpTic has had such talented players throughout their roster that they can kill all of these players and then still lose respawns, or obviously they've historically lost search and destroy more often than not. But the idea is that sometimes you focus a little too much on the slaying and not as much on the objective, which is the most important part, obviously, because you can each get 30 kills on the map, but if you let the other team get to 250 in hardpoint, then it's kind of like worthless. Nobody cares about your stats at that point. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how Ghosty fits into this roster. It might take him a little bit, and it's going to be online to begin with, so maybe some things will just be different, and it'll kind of be an adjustment period. But I want to get your thoughts on iLLeY being the one to be benched, specifically because I had thought Dashy was was pretty much destined to be replaced at some point in the season again because he had already been benched and he had been benched in the offseason with iLLeY, and then he had been benched when they decided to bring in Hook. So I just thought when this roster makes a change, and I didn't think that there was a change coming before the third stage of the Call of Duty League. I thought maybe they'll let it ride until after the third major, which would OpTic hosts that. So that's a coincidence. But I thought they would ride it out, see how things go, and then make a change. And that Dashy would probably be the person to be replaced. So why do you think they went with iLLeY? Do you think that's the right decision, replacing iLLeY specifically to bring in Ghosty?
I think based on the current construction of the roster that iLLeY was the only choice OpTic really had to make if they wanted to make a change. Shotzi is basically face of the franchise at this point, just like Dashy is, which was made very clear after the last time where he was brought back in. So maybe before the whole Scump retirement, speech calling him out, Hex confirming that like he's like, no, Dashy's here to stay. Maybe before that you can make the argument that Dashy might get dropped again. But it seems like Shotzi and Dashy are here to stay. Hook was just recently signed, so it would have been weird, I feel like, if they had just recently signed him and then benched him after one event. And then like you mentioned earlier, this, iLLeY alongside Dashy was benched early in the offseason last year for a very brief period of time. So along that train of thought, like if they were willing to bench Dashy at one point, it's not surprising that they were willing to bench iLLeY here. And based on that criteria laid out, with Shotzi, Dashy kind of being staples at this point, and then Hook recently signed, feels like if they wanted to make a change, it had to just be iLLeY by process of elimination.
I'll just jump in real quick because I don't know if you saw this, but Hex did an Eavesdrop podcast with Hook, and he asked him about replacing iLLeY in the roster. And this is what Hook had to say. Quote, "I think we all love Ender. I think everyone does. It just seemed like to me something that wasn't needed, but was on people's minds on the team for a while now. Shotzi, Dashy, and iLLeY know a lot about how they work and if they can work. I think it was just one of those needed moves for everyone to move on." So I think that's it, and I think it means more obviously when Hook comes in. He's only been in the team for like a month or so, and he's able to make that statement, and a pretty definitive statement. If like the idea just that it was probably needed, and this is coming from someone who hasn't been on the team for a long time. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I saw it in my subscriber box, but I never actually watched it. So glad you brought that up. But I mean, yeah, like I said, I just think it makes the most sense, especially given that if it was something they thought about even before this season, it's no surprise to hear they were thinking about it during the season as well. That being benching iLLeY. So I'm really interested to see where iLLeY goes from here. I don't think it looks like he's going to be competing anytime in the immediate future. Unless he does something in challengers, but it doesn't seem like there's any rumors about him getting signed by a CDL team or anything like that. So I'm really interested to see what his next move will be, and this is something that could light the fire under him, just because he is a world champion, and everybody knows what he's capable of, especially in search and destroy, and from a strategic mindset. That's that point of view. So he could definitely make some teams better. It's just a question of what team and how they're able to acquire him. So I don't think this is the last we'll see of iLLeY, but it seems like we're gonna have to wait a little bit to see him make his return at least.
Yeah, definitely. One thing before we move on from the topic, and I brought this up to Bink right before we went on the air because it was something that very much interests me. I believe that I know that Ghosty is the first amateur player, in air quotes, or challengers player that OpTic has picked up as a starter since like in over a decade. Like I can say that with confidence because we're here 2023 and their roster in 2013 was Scump, Nadeshot, Big T, and Merc, which we all know that those four were pros before they were picked up by OpTic. And I'm looking through the COD Sports wiki right now to try to figure out who is the last player that was previously an amateur before they were picked up by OpTic as a starter. And I have absolutely no idea who the player could be. Obviously, the definition of pro has been kind of ambiguous over the years. But I guess as I look at it, obviously, if you competed in the CWO Pro League, then you're obviously a pro. Like I'm not gonna even argue with that. So anyone that made it into the CWO Pro League or you made it into the CDL, you're a pro. That's fine. It gets a little more tricky before that because you could say the MLG Pro League, which I would agree with. If you got into the MLG Pro League, you probably were a pro as well. Before that, though, there was no like actual league, and they were typically only basing it off of LAN results. So
Yeah, you had to get top 16 to be considered a pro.
yeah, so I'm looking at Proofy right now because not when Proofy joined OpTic and like Ghosts or whatever, but I guess Proofy joined OpTic in 2011. So I'm trying to see if he had been a pro beforehand. And
One with Quantum and Scump
yeah,
too.
so it's I'll pull it up on the screen just as I'm looking through these players. But I think maybe Vengeance could be an option because before this he was on Next Threat, and I mean he got top 8 at a PCL and he got third in a PCL. So I don't know if you considered him an AM or not at that point. And there's no information that I can see for Moonstruck, Gundeezy, Diesel, Eaton, and Nerve. Obviously, Diesel, co-founder of OpTic. So, and Flawless, longtime pro. So it's literally been probably 12, 13 years since OpTic has done something like this, where they've taken a player completely, that hasn't had any pro success and decided to make them a part of their roster. Even Scump was very, very young when he signed with OpTic, but he had already, I think, won a title with Quantum Leverage at that point. So he had success beforehand. He was just at a very young age. And we've seen players like Shotzi come in and play at like a very high level immediately. But what was Shotzi doing beforehand? Was he just like on Splice?
What do you mean? Before he came to COD, he won. Yeah, he was on Splice's Halo team, and they won champs.
Well, I don't know. Was OpTic the first COD team that he was on as a pro?
No, Dallas Empire was.
Oh yeah, never mind. I was conflating the two. Yeah. So even then, Shotzi came from Dallas. Yeah, I completely forgot about that. Yeah, so I have literally no idea what the player could be, and it's probably one of these players if I had to guess. Nadeshot, what was he doing before he got into OpTic? He was on OpTic Nation first or no, he wasn't.
May have been some like placing thing, but yeah, I mean even there he's getting third and sixth in 2011.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
so
that's before.
well, he got fourth in a PCL. So does that? I have to get some old heads to comment on this. Like someone tag Aches or something to see how they define it. Do like PCL placings count toward being pro in like 2010 and 2011? Because if not, like Nadeshot could technically be the first one because he has pretty limited placing. Oh no, he had a fourth in the national championship. So never mind. Like, all right, we got to figure this out at some point, but I don't want to spend way too much time on it. But I just thought it was interesting that they did this.
Yeah, I think the simple answer is that, Ghosty is the first amateur picked up by OpTic Texas, and we ended there.
Yeah.
No, we can debate semantics over the old process for as long as we want. It might take forever. But we know, especially with the current system now, the trivia answer to your question is likely Ghosty moving forward.
Yeah, and that I think that says by itself a lot about how much they think of Ghosty. To like, I'm sure they obviously the reports were that they tried to get Pred after the first major. It didn't work out. They tried to get Arstes after the first major as well. That didn't work out. But to go with Ghosty now seems like a big, big confidence boost, at least for him, just knowing that people in OpTic really wanted him, regardless of his lack of competitive pro experience.
And one quick thing before we move on to that I just thought of, it would be interesting. I don't know if they talked about it in that Who Can Hex podcast, but it would be interesting if they do. They probably will do a podcast with Ghosty or one of the OpTic ones with him included, or at least talking about the move to get him. But it would be interesting to know how much Rambo had a hand in this move, because he technically is still the GM of the team despite no longer being the coach. But again, we know historically how players kind of drive a lot of the roster changes in the CDL, as well as evidenced by the recent Dashy move. Even Hex, as an owner, played a role in it more recently too for this team. So I would be interested to know what kind of involvement Rambo had in the decision, but that's something we'll probably have to wait to see if we find out ever.
Yeah. I would be really interested in that as well. What kind of process was that, especially if Ghosty was fielding offers from other teams, specifically Florida, how that process went. Speaking of Florida's made quite a few roster changes in this little break we've had since Major 2 heading into Major 3 qualifiers. We've talked about it before, but we didn't talk about one, but Major Maniac and Vickle, Vickle's been benched. Major Maniac has been outright released, as far as I know, right?
I believe so.
And then Dave Patty, we haven't talked about this one, but Dave Patty was also outright released by Florida. And so the two confirmed roster changes, roster additions, I should say, that have been made. Brack is coming back into the starting roster. He started as a starter for Florida to begin the season, and he's coming back in. And then Fellow, who played with Ghosty in Challengers, most recently won the Boston Open. He will be coming into the starting roster. Previously with Dallas, previously with Paris. Maybe that's it, but obviously a longtime pro, United, several teams across the league. And the rumor is that Capsidal will also be heading to Florida to be on this roster, which he's formerly of the Boston Breach last season, one of the better rookies in the league last year before being benched late in the season. And this season he's been he's played a few matches for the Los Angeles Thieves when Kenny was out with an illness. So a lot going on in Florida. Definitely probably a necessary overhaul for this team, considering heading into the season we were both pretty down on the roster. We didn't see a lot of hope for them, and they haven't had a lot of success so far this year. So what do you make of these changes? Obviously, the Capsidal thing is not confirmed. That hasn't been announced yet, but it's likely to happen based on the reports that we've seen. So what do you think of Brack, Fellow, and Capsidal coming into Florida?
Yeah, so I think if the actual Florida roster is Havoc, Capsidal, Fellow, and Brack, the first thing that we talked about a little bit last episode is just happy for Brack that he's back. We talked about it at the time when he got benched. It didn't make sense statistically. He was their best performing player. So I think in that regard it makes sense that Brack is back in the lineup. I also, you kind of talked about Fellow's history a little bit, but he was in my eyes coming up as one of Fizzerp's prodigies way back in the Ghost days. So Fizzerp was one of my favorite players to watch back in the day. So I'm happy for Fellow too, that he's back in the league getting another shot. And same sort of thing with Capsule, right? You know, had a rookie year last year where he got benched towards the end of the year, but he showed potential. I know there were multiple times I feel like last year we were talking about him like potentially setting a kill record on Bokage. So he definitely has some slaying potential. That seemed like it was potentially an issue for Florida, but obviously just overall their hard point was a major issue. So massive changes like this aren't surprising, and especially for a guy like Capsule, you know, Bokage may be an outlier in competitive COD history, but if Cap is able to up the slaying on this team, you know, paired with Brack reinserted, already producing a high level of slaying and good KD numbers, statistically that might help Florida improve and respawn. But once again, we'll have to wait and see if the roster gets confirmed that we're talking about and how they actually gel together. But um, I think I think like you said, it was necessary for Florida to make changes. It'll just be interesting to see how they play out.
Definitely. Oh, I think this is a necessary change, and it's just I don't even know if this is enough. It's going to be interesting just to see how they gel, because it's been a little bit since we saw Fellow in the league. Brack has had very limited chances to prove himself as a pro. He had a few weeks to start this season. He never got a chance with Toronto in 2020. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. Like, he should have some time to kind of prove himself, especially on Florida, where they don't have a lot of options, as far as I know, to really improve their roster in any significant way through like a trade or free agency. There's just not a lot of options for them. And Capsule, like you said, like he was just a rookie last year, one of the youngest players in the entire league. I thought he performed really well for Boston. As we've noted several times, they kind of were picking up the scrap, so to speak, heading into that season, because they were so late in constructing their roster, because they had just bought into the CDL and they didn't have as much time as everyone else to kind of look at all of the free agents and make a decision. But I thought he played pretty well, and him getting benched late in the season had, I think, absolutely no reflection on him. And that was more just the team trying to make a last second push for champs. And Vivid is also a great player, and I can't honestly say that I wouldn't have made that decision to bring in Vivid and to replace Capsule, even if it was a pretty big sacrifice of Capsule's potential to kind of bench a rookie when you could have probably let it play out and see how he handled things late in the season. But that's a decision that they made, and it's the decision we've kind of had to deal with. This is an interesting roster. I just don't see it happening, or I don't see them making like a big splash regardless. But I mean, I'm okay to watch it. I think if it's kind of like Paris's roster to start the season last year, where they had Fellow, coincidentally. I think they had Decimate, Temp, obviously, and maybe someone else that I'm forgetting. And John. So that roster, I think on paper, seems pretty similar. The fact that there are a lot of veterans, some young talent, some like kind of unproven talent. But at the end of the day, I don't think that there's anything that Florida can do with the talent they have right now that will, catch up like significantly to teams like FaZe or LAT or New York. It's just kind of how it goes. There's just not enough talent to get to the very top with every team. But I do think that they can make it to champs, which should be their goal, right? Like I mean, obviously everyone wants to win championships, but that's probably not a realistic goal for everybody. But making champs is a realistic goal for everybody. Everybody can make champs, even the worst teams. Even Paris last year, when they were absolutely horrible, they had an outside chance to make champs heading into like the last few weeks of the season. So, I mean, you just have to get in the top 8. I don't think it's that hard, but they're gonna have to push for that. That's really their goal, and maybe just develop this talent that has been pushed to the side and hasn't been taken as seriously. Maybe that's something they also look at, because it could turn out lucrative for them, right? Like if they develop someone like Brack into a player that other teams want in the offseason or later on in the season, they could do what Seattle might be hoping they can do with Pred before the end of the season, and that's, trade them or sell their contract for money so they can get some of that back. But yeah, I don't see it happening for Florida, but I'm pretty interested nonetheless about their future prospects. Let's talk about Boston, because we don't really have a lot to say about methods, so to speak, but because we've talked about him already with his retirement. But his retirement also leaves a void in the Boston Breach lineup, and it looks like Beans will be replacing him. Beans, the replacement, the substitute for Boston this season. He came in when Awakening got sick during the first LAN event in Raleigh, and he's been playing in Challengers, obviously. What do you think of Beans coming in to replace Methods? I believe that's just a report. I don't know if has that been confirmed?
Yeah, it was confirmed yesterday.
Okay, so confirmed Beans for Methods. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think there's much to say here, because it's kind of word of mouth at this point. We literally saw Beans play in one match with Boston at Major 1 when he was filling in for Awakening. So obviously he was playing alongside Methods, Nero, and Vivid there for just one match, and now he's playing with Awakening in place of Methods, and then the same subs there with Nero and Vivid. So small sample size in his pro debut, but I'm pretty sure, if I remember that series correctly, he played well in the hard points against Vegas. Maybe it was they played Elevate in Vegas. I think they played Elevate first, though, and then they lost to Vegas. So I think it was against Vegas, and they lost 3-2. But regardless, that doesn't really matter. Just small sample size of him in the CDL. Heard good things about him in Challengers. So I'm just looking forward to seeing more of what he's able to produce. From a business standpoint, though, this is just an A+ move for me, because it just logistically makes sense. You have a player retire. You already have a substitute on the payroll. So just having him swoop right in to fill that need makes a lot of sense for Boston from a business standpoint. Now, the bigger question is, if this doesn't work out for Boston, where do they go from here? That's a different topic for a different day, but it is something to keep in mind, just because they don't have, it seemed like this was an easy answer for Boston, right? AR retires, they fill in with the AR sub, but if something else happens with this team, or they decide to go in a different direction and make another move, they don't realistically have that same capability unless they sign a different sub now as an official CDL sub, and that person replaces them. But getting off topic, I just think heard good things about Beans. Just looking forward to seeing what he's able to do. If he is the same type of AR player as Methods, or at least similar, he has those aggressive subs in front of him, like Nero and Vivid, who can set the tone and bait out a little bit, help him get those kills. So I like this move. Just on paper, business standpoint, all that stuff. Just gonna have to actually see how it translates on the virtual playing field.
I don't know if Beans doesn't work out, I don't know who the replacement is. But if it's a submachine gun player, there is a certain big bicep, almost always shirtless or sleeveless man that is under contract with the Boston Breach as a content creator. Also played with Beans on the Academy roster. His name is Doug, and he probably loved to get a spot in the CDL. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but now that has been put in my brain by my brain, then I definitely want it to happen, just to kind of see what happens in the league. I think there's a good chance that he'd drop 6 kills, maybe 7 kills in a map, and 7. I think that would be interesting. I think people would really love to see it. The viewership would probably be crazy just to see Sensor in the league, but it's probably not likely. And for the Boston Breach's sake, I hope that it doesn't come to that, because that means something has gone wrong in this roster, that they've had to make another roster change. And I think that there is potential in this roster, potential to, be in the top 6, maybe get to the top 4 if they're able to really come together as a team and almost act as like that Toronto roster from 2021 that was, one of the best teams in the game just because of the chemistry. It wasn't simply because they had all of this elite talent. They did, and I think that Boston has some really good talent as well. But I have no idea what Beans brings to the table. I'm obviously not too keen on challengers. I know that he did have some success with the Ultra Academy EU roster last season, but really, like, that was last year. This is this year. So he's competed in the 2 open tournaments with the Boston Academy roster, and they placed top 16 in both. So he's been playing with Sensor, Crimp, and Shawnee. Obviously, we know Shawnee and Sensor very well. Josh is one of their coaches, and we know Josh very well. Additionally, but top 16 not great, but it's also a lot of these teams aren't looking at like your challengers placing as well. Like, obviously Mohawk doesn't even have a team, so challengers placing is not the end all be all, but how he fits into this roster is very important, and it'll be interesting to see if he is a good fit. Not a great time for Methods to retire, of course. No time during the season probably would be great, but this is what we're working with. And Boston, they have they've probably been practicing with him for a little bit, and they know him at least. He's not a complete stranger to the team, I would think, and he's gotten time to play, in that first major, despite the circumstances. So, going to be interesting to see what happens with Boston and Boston Beans, which is, one of the greatest marketing opportunities. Maybe like, baked beans or something. I don't know. He's English, I'm pretty sure, so they love their beans.
That's what they did in the promo video for him. They did the beans on toast.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of looks disgusting, although I do like baked beans, but it seems like it would be soggy, and that doesn't seem like a good texture thing.
Yeah, I'm not a beans guy, so I'm not a beans the food guy.
Wow, you hate beans like that. That's crazy. He's just getting a shot. Last bit of RosterMania news that we have. Our favorite team, also our most hated team at certain points in the season, the Las Vegas Legion, have decided to make a change in their roster, replacing ProLoot with 2 Real. So I think we saw a roster change probably coming for Vegas at some point. And I thought it probably should happen in this little window that we have before the 3rd set of qualifying matches. I wasn't sure exactly what that roster change was going to be. I was very fearful that it was going to be Clayster. I'm not going to lie. I was a little scared that it was going to be Clay that was going to be on the outskirts, but we've now seen that ProLoot has been outright released, so he hasn't been benched. He's just outright released from the Vegas Legion roster, and 2 Real, who I believe played with Florida last year, and he obviously hasn't had a ton of pro experience, but I mean, he was on that team with Fellow and Ghosty that won the Boston Open. That we've been talking about, and he also played with Hollow, Mock, and Ulysses, same guy that he won the Boston Open with. He got top 16 in the first Raleigh Open, and I guess they're being coached by Parasite, which is cool. He also won the Toronto Open last year with Brack, Major Maniac, and Neptune, and yeah, like I think there's a lot of potential for this roster as like I think this roster is better than last year's, which isn't saying a whole lot. And I think that they're good enough to be a top 8 team, but consistency and the respawns has been a really major issue for them this year. winning S&D is just not enough in the CDL. So what do you make of this change? Do you feel like Vegas was it right to replace Pro Loot? Was it right to make this change now? And what do you feel about 2Real coming into the roster?
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out the most to me is that obviously you mentioned his past history a little bit in the sense that he wasn't on, or he was briefly on the Florida Mutineers at the end of last year. Um, in my eyes, I think it was a small sample size because I believe it was only for the last major um, of the Vanguard season because I don't think Florida made champs. So again, very small sample size, but he obviously wasn't immediately picked up by a CDL team heading into this season for Modern Warfare 2 after being in the league at the end of last year. And the comparison that I was making in my head just from that pure like transaction standpoint is Fire with Paris, right? Fire was this guy who was highly touted in the challenger scene heading into Cold War. He got his shot with Paris Legion, was then benched or released, whatever the case may be for him, and then he hasn't been in the CDL again since. So it could have been very easy for the same thing to happen with 2Real in the sense of him not getting signed by a team at the start of this year, and then potentially not being able to find himself in the CDL again. But that's not the case. Clearly, he is getting that second opportunity that somebody like Fire might not or hasn't gotten yet to this point. So I think he just has to take the most of this opportunity and make the most of it. Because second chances are rare. And again, like I said, small sample size from in the CDL already. I don't even remember his stats or anything like that. I just know the Florida team didn't perform necessarily any better, really, in my recollection than the previous squad. So, um, yeah, I just think he's getting this other shot now. It's another situation where he's coming into a team that's not necessarily at the top of the standings. So I just think it's going to be interesting to see how he performs. Maybe last year I think like you mentioned, he won with Major Maniac and Challengers, and then was both of them. Major Maniac made his way back to Florida with 2Real. But now he's getting a chance to play with a guy like Clay, who's one of your favorite players, just an absolute legend and a veteran. So he has an opportunity to not only show what he's capable of, but at the absolute minimum, he has an opportunity to learn from one of the greatest minds in Call of Duty history. So, for 2Real's sake, he should be thinking of this as a really solid opportunity to show what he's capable of and to continue his development as a player. And I think that's what he's going to look to do.
I'm not sure how long the leash is, not for just 2Real, but for this iteration of the Legion roster, because obviously if they keep struggling, it's going to make it harder and harder to qualify for champs at the end of the year, which is the ultimate goal. And some things really need to change with their respawns. I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but I'm pretty sure they have like a sub 40% win percentage in both hardpoint and control, but they have like a 60% win percentage when it comes to search and destroy, which obviously it's great. We say S&D win championships, but when you can't actually get to the championship, it doesn't actually win championships. So the stats are they're actually worse than I thought. So they're 10 and 20 in hardpoint, 4 and 12 in control, and 15 and 8 in search and destroy. I mean, really good search numbers. That's undeniable, but they're really, really bad. Like really, really bad. So they're 14 and 32 in respawn game modes this year, and that's just not acceptable. It's going to make it really difficult to do anything. It's almost a recipe for a bottom 4 finish to the season, which is exactly what Paris would not want, considering they have had really bad placings the last 2 seasons. And I believe the first year wasn't that bad. It wasn't great, but they, I believe, got second at one of the events, one of those home series events online, if I'm not mistaken. And I think they've they were all right that year, but they're historically the worst team in the CDL's history, and they have the worst season in the CDL's history from last year. And missing the playoffs this year would be just kind of like, what the hell are you even? What are you doing? Like, how do you not make the playoffs once? So I'm just interested. I don't think that Too Real is somehow going to turn this team around. That's just too much to expect of one player to completely flip all of these like bad trends as far as their respawns go. I don't think that's fair for us to expect that out of him, and I don't expect that out of him. So I expect more of the same, more or less, I guess, to happen where they are underperforming in respawns and good in search and destroy, and to lose most of their matches. So, I mean, Paris. I almost called him Paris. I saw that iLLeY. People were talking about like how they wanted iLLeY to get on Vegas, and iLLeY just completely shot it down immediately, where he just like, LOL, I am not going to Vegas. Like that's not a good sign. Like the reputation of this team is so bad that like this player that literally does not have a team to start on, he's just a bench player right now, and he's just like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. But that's the reputation that Vegas / Paris / the Legion, that's the reputation that they've earned and deserve. So, I mean, congrats to Too Real. I think that's awesome that he was able to get back into the CDL, because like you mentioned with Fire, sometimes it doesn't work out like that. Sometimes you get that chance in the CDL and it can be very brief, and it takes a very long time, or maybe we'll see with Fire's career. Maybe he will get another chance, but so far he has not gotten another chance. I also think, as we're speaking on this, that Pander, I saw that Joey Nubsy, he was tweeting about Pander. Obviously, Joey Nubsy was the head coach of the Seattle Surge previously, before his now he's with the Minnesota Rocker as kind of like a director, if I'm not mistaken. But he used to be the head coach of the Seattle Surge. Pander was a substitute for the Surge during the 2020 season, or the 2019-20 season. And Pander's never been back in the CDL, and he's consistently been, as far as I know, one of the better performing Challengers players. The only thing is he's an AR player, so there are very limited spots, like a main AR player, so there are limited spots for that. But even then, like, he just hasn't even gotten the chance. He hasn't been a substitute since then. And I do think that there is a little bit of, the reputation, like it kind of out of sight, out of mind. A lot of these teams, a lot of the players are not really focusing on the challenger scene. It doesn't really mean a lot to them because they're focused on the CDL, and, rightfully so. They're thinking about winning their matches, about performing to the best possible level. But I mean, Pander's been doing stuff in challengers, and he's probably not going to get a chance. It doesn't seem like. So it kind of is that. Like, Too Real, I think, is one of the fortunate ones where he, and it's very coincidental that you see fellow Ghosty and Too Real from this same team that just won the Boston Challengers Open. They have all been picked up by different pro teams heading into this next set of qualifying matches, which makes me think that Ulysses, if I'm saying his name correctly, I'd be a little pissed because I'm literally the only player. I think it happened with Diamond Con as well earlier in the year with the LAG Academy team. It happens like that sometimes, and I don't really know if there's a lot you can do about it other than just keep grinding away and hope that something happens, something falls in your favor the next time.
Yeah, and I mean, even to your Pander point, I'll raise you one with GodderX, right? GodderX was an MVP caliber player in the first half of the Modern Warfare 2019 season, and then it transitioned to online. He struggled a little bit, but he hasn't been back in the CDL since then. He was legit, like, you mentioned Pander being a substitute and briefly getting a shot with the Surge. GodderX was a starter and in the conversation for early season MVP at that point. Like he was dropping numbers. I remember him sniping on Piccadilly. Like he was playing really well. So I think guys like that, especially Pander and Godorex, who are a little older, more veteran, that they would be prime candidates for expansion teams coming in looking to, you know, start from challengers, but maybe have some older slash veteran challengers players alongside that fresh talent. Um, but expansion has been something we've been talking about for years now, and we don't know when it's happening or if it's happening. So, like you said, they're gonna have to just keep grinding to try to make their way back in. But yeah, like you said for Two Real, he's getting that second chance now. He's just got to make the most of it.
Yeah, I actually saw that the conversation about expansion teams being kind of reignited. I think Parasite said it on the flank recently about how there needs to be more than 12 teams because there's so much talent, like in challengers specifically. And then some of the other players and members of the community were talking about how there's just a lot of talent internationally. So like there's only one European team in the CDL. So not a lot of teams like other than London are probably going to take that chance on like an English player. Obviously Pred is one of the few where he's gotten that opportunity being an APAC player and getting a chance with a CDL team immediately. But I think we could see, I think if anything, it would be awesome just to see more international teams, like an Australian team. Like I think that if we really want to be a global league, a global esport, there has to be something like that to help these other scenes. There's just a lot of talent in general, and more expansion teams would be great. And if there's 4 more NA teams, that's whatever, 16 players at least, hopefully 20 if they each get a substitute player, not just their coach. But even if it's just 16 players, that's awesome. That's 16 players that got to move up from the grind, from the challengers. They get out of the pit and get to main stage, which would be awesome for them. But I just want to see the league get more global and kind of build out the infrastructure. So like players in Latin America, Europe, APAC, they feel like they actually can get to the league. And I don't feel like it's a very accessible thing right now. But again, another topic for another day. We were literally just talking about it earlier, how we need to do one of these off-season pods where we just talk about specific topics, and maybe in the off season we actually will touch on expansion. Maybe we'll get expansion, which would be nice. I'm not too confident, but it's something to hope for. Cross your fingers for. I think that about does it for our RosterMania stuff. So we have these next set of qualifying matches starting this weekend. As usual, all of these matches are online. We're going to have 3 weeks of qualifying matches leading into the third major of the CDL season, which will be held in Arlington, Texas at the Esports Stadium. So OpTic will be hosting this upcoming major. I believe I got an email that said all of the tickets for the major have been sold out except for the first day. Those are the only day. That's the only day that hasn't been sold out so far. So likely going to be like a complete sellout for the OpTic major, which is very impressive. A very good sign for the league as far as the events, and obviously you can attest to how many Call of Duty fans are willing to brave the cold of Boston and file into a small arena to just watch some Call of Duty. It's a really great sign for the state of Call of Duty esports that people are flying out or driving to these events to support their favorite teams and players. Let's start at the top. So Friday, February 17th, we have 3 matches. The first of which Las Vegas, so the Las Vegas Legion versus the Los Angeles Thieves. There is not a chance in hell that I would pick the Legion at this point, so I'm going to go with the Thieves. I'm assuming you're the
Thieves.
same. Yeah, so
Yep.
Thieves. Minnesota versus New York. I'm going to go with, that's tough. I mean, who knows what Minnesota shows up, so I'm going to go with New York on this one.
Yeah, I'm going New York to rematch of the first round of the Boston Major.
Toronto versus Boston. I can't pick Boston just with all of the uncertainty around how Beans will fit into this team, so I'm going to go with the Ultra.
Me too.
Saturday, February 18th, we have 4 matches on the schedule. First, Boston Breach versus London. Oh, that's...
You said you can't pick Boston, so you have to take London.
Okay, I'll pick London.
I'm joking. You don't have to.
But I think I do have to pick London because I don't have confidence in either of these teams, and London fans are probably like cheering that I have picked against them because they'll probably win now.
So are you going London or Boston?
I'm gonna go with London.
All right, I'm going Boston.
Actually, no. Yeah, they would. I got it opposite. They would be very sad that I picked them. But you picked Boston, so I don't know. They'll probably end in a tie. Maybe the servers will crash right in the middle of that match. Atlanta versus Florida. I'm gonna go with the FaZe.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty clear-cut one.
OpTic versus LAG. I mean, I have absolutely no confidence in LAG, so I'm gonna go with OpTic.
I think this is an interesting one. We kind of talked about it. You know,
Ghosty's first match.
Ghosty's first match, and we saw how LAG with this new roster performed at least the start of the qualifiers last time, as well as even in their tougher schedule to end the qualifiers heading into the major. They still played, you know, they were taking maps, they weren't getting smoked. So this could be a close match, but I'm going to go with OpTic.
Seattle versus Minnesota. Oh, I mean, Seattle is like, I mean, I don't know how big of a losing streak they're on, but they've probably lost like 6 of their last 7 matches, if I would have to guess. I mean, I have to pick Minnesota because it feels so wrong to pick Seattle when they're so low right now.
Yeah, and for the complete opposite reason, I'm going to go with Seattle because, you know, we've talked about it before, them being like that seesaw back and forth team. You know, they were on the low end in Major 2 and Major 2 qualifiers, so now it's their turn to kick things up a notch. So I'll go with them here.
I'm not saying it's a make or break, like match or anything, but for Seattle, they really just need to make sure that they don't start in the losers bracket of the next major because that's just such a death sentence for a lot of these teams. It's so hard to just like, you're not warm. You don't have like a first match or anything. If you lose that first match, it's over immediately. And Seattle, like we just saw, like completely bounce from the tournament immediately. So if they don't win this one, it's going to make it very difficult the rest of the way. But I think Seattle's probably the team to watch along with like OpTic just to see how things go in this set of qualifying matches because it's like it's pretty up in the air with Seattle and what's going to happen with this team. Sunday, February 19th, our final 3 matches, New York versus Florida, obviously New York.
Yep, New York for me.
Vegas versus Toronto, obviously Toronto.
Toronto for me.
And the final match of the week, Atlanta FaZe versus the Los Angeles Thieves, a rematch. I mean, this is a great way to end the week. And I'm going to go with LAT because this is online. And LAT has done really well against Atlanta online and on LAN. But I just have a feeling the Thieves are going to come out with a little more gusto, a little revenge for FaZe after the major.
Yeah, I think that is important to point out online with LA playing from LA, Atlanta playing from Atlanta, so there could be some ping server issues. But nonetheless, we just saw Atlanta take down the Thieves in the grand finals of Boston, so I'm sticking with FaZe here.
And that does it for our predictions. Ranked play coming out, so it'll be today when people are listening to it probably. So Wednesday, February 15th. Season 2 of Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone comes out, and along with it comes ranked play. The game's only been out for about 3 months, so it's, you know, better late than never. But what are you excited for ranked play? I know you and Trem have been playing Jeebs and stuff, but I mean, I don't know, like ranked play is kind of hit or miss sometimes. and I don't know what to expect. I'll definitely be watching. I won't be playing, obviously, but I'll be watching some streams, maybe turning into Jetpacker Jay's stream if he decides to put it on. Maybe the weeniest Jim. Maybe he'll play COD. Probably not. So, are you excited for ranked play to come out? And if so, what are you most looking forward to?
I think we're getting a little misinformation here because I heard this was the return of Peace Dog and that he was doing a race with Jim to see who gets iridescent first.
I mean, if the richest Jim would like to donate to my GoFundMe and get me computer parts to pay for so I could run MW2, I'd appreciate it. But other than that, that's fake news.
No, but in all seriousness, I'm not like super excited for ranked play or anything. I'll probably play it a little bit here and there, but I do think the new system with more traditional ranks, like last year it was kind of weird with like the advanced and elite and whatnot. Now they're doing, traditional bronze, silver, gold, platinum, diamond. The traditional ranks you see across the most popular ranked games in the world, like League and Valorant, that sort of thing. So I think that's good to see. It, makes it a little more easy to interpret for people outside of the world of COD as well. Um, at the same time, I think the SR system they're implementing, well, they implemented the SR system last year, but they like bumped it up a ton to the point where it's like goes up to 10,000 plus, and the players who are 10,000 plus SR are going to be like the top 250. Where like last year, like 2,000 SR got you to elite, and now that's like technically silver in this system. So
Yeah.
I'm interested to see how the SR gains and that sort of thing works with this. But other than that, I think the only other thing worth mentioning, they officially added some of like the GAs, like the M4, the 74U, and flash grenades. Those were officially added to the competitive playlist, and I know head Ego Chall correspondent Tremor and I were talking about that being wishful thinking that they would actually, implement those changes in the ban list so they weren't in ranked play at launch. But we were proven wrong for once, and um, you're not going to be staring at the white screen due to the OP flash grenades, and you won't have to worry about the super overpowered M4 in ranked play. It should be as close to the meta we see in pro play as possible. So that's a good thing to see, especially before the launch of ranked. Like they if they had made these changes to the rule set after ranked play dropped, I wouldn't have necessarily been surprised. Because probably a lot of people would have been complaining about the M4 and flashes, but to see them do it beforehand is definitely a positive thing in my mind.
Yeah, definitely. I was not concerned because I don't get concerned about COD. Like I just expect all of that stuff. But I was anticipating all of the backlash that would come with like the videos and screenshots of people just being absolutely blinded by their screens turning white with the flashes, or just being deleted in like 2 bullets by the M4, and a lot of angry gamers online. I mean, we're still going to get that. I'm sure there's going to be some problems with ranked play because they're rolling out something, and there's always going to be issues that happen with that kind of stuff. But I mean, I hope that it's a good ranked play. I never want it to be a bad one because that's just horrible for competitive when, the competitive players actually don't have any first party feature to play like competitive in. I obviously would have loved for it to come out earlier because again, this is 3 months into the season, and it's like, or maybe 2 months. I think 2 months into the season, not three. But still, like it's quite a bit after the start of the season to do this, but better late than never. And I'm glad that people are getting it. I think it could be fun if the maps are kind of random and nobody has to sit through the same map or the same game mode all the time. I think you could see guys like Scump or other big streamers like Zuma possibly playing the game at getting thousands and thousands of viewers, which is only good for competitive, but we'll see how that goes. Before we get out of here, just to remind you guys our pick'em records. So we both went 12-6 at the major. I know we mentioned this last week, but it's good to just reiterate before we head into the next set of qualifying matches. We both went 12-6 at the major. You are now 39-33 on the season. I'm 37-35, above 500 as expected, and we will be. I mean, we had a little bit of differences, but not not too many differences
Yeah.
across the board. It's kind of a chalk week, but that Atlanta versus LA team match really something to watch. The OpTic match, Ghosty's debut, who knows how that's going to go. So some interesting matches, but a lot of on paper mismatches going into this week. But yeah, that does it. Subscribe, like, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, etc. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify. Follow us on Twitter. He is at jbink with 2 Ks. I am at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. And speaking of Twitter, I'm thinking of doing the podcast on Twitter Spaces. Simultaneously with Twitch, maybe restreaming it to YouTube as well. Obviously, this goes over Bink's head. He's not involved in the production or whatever you want to call it of the podcast. But if that's something you're all interested in, please let me know if it's worth it. I obviously don't want to spend too much time or energy on something that doesn't have any effect on the podcast at all. But if that's something you're interested in, just let me know, and that'll be noted. The next show, probably February 20th or the 21st, which means that the podcast would hit your feeds the 21st or the 22nd, which will recap the first week of the Major League qualifiers and give our thoughts on the second week of the Major League qualifiers. Also, I mean, who knows? We might be back on YouTube before you know it. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, that does it for me. Bank, take it away.
Short and sweet for me. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Looking forward to the matches this weekend and seeing some new rosters, some fresh faces making their debuts. So should be a good one there. And as always, remember to send the chow.